Okay, here's something interesting. I use pretty high spring rates. In fact, I've been using higher spring rates than anybody else in the industry for a long time. And the reason for that, the more spring you put into a Mustang, the better it turns. And a lot of people think if you put a high spring rate in the car, it's going to equal a bad ride. And that's not true. The function of the spring is basically just to hold the car up. The ride quality actually comes from the shock absorbers, or more specifically, the valving in the shock absorbers. And that's why I'm very particular on the shocks that we use. Over the years, I've developed. This is my shock data book, and as you can see, it's just loaded with shock dynos and shock data for years and years and years I've been collecting. And I've got to the point of like a specific range of shock dampening that I prefer. So all the shocks that we're doing today fall within that range. And the spring rates are something I pick individually for everybody that gets coilovers from us. I'll pick out the spring rates for their application, and I think coilovers, every car that I do has coilover shocks. Two specific reasons. Number one, you get to adjust your ride height, which is really handy. And secondly, I can control spring rate with it. We do different spring rates for different drivers, different applications. To just kind of give you a real quick, brief overview, and we'll get into more of this in the workshop, is the typical car right off the showroom floor runs about a 175 front spring rate. And on the S197s or any of the live axle cars, I always talk in terms of front spring rate because that's how the car turns. I use the rear spring rate in the car to kind of balance the car. The more spring you put into a Mustang, the better it turns. To give you an example, the off the showroom floor car is running about let's say 170, 175 front spring rate. Any off the shelf springs that you can get are going to be 220, 225 range. Very few go above that. Our touring package is 350 pound spring. Our street performance jumps to 400, and that is also good for novice track. That's a really good novice track spring rate. Our intermediate people is like 500, 550. Advanced track goes up to 650. And you're probably saying, my gosh, that's a lot of spring rate. Well, in my late son Paul's World Challenge Mustang on Pirelli slicks, we're running 850 and above pounds of spring rate. Now, the reason we start people low is the more spring you put into a car, the faster it gets. The downside of that is the more spring you put into the car, the smaller the envelope for error gets. So, when you're running a lot of spring rate, you got very little room for error. Like on Paul's, World Challenge car, there's very little room for error, but he was such a dynamic driver, he made it work. So that's why we always start people at a low spring rate, and as they improve through their driving, then we can, with the coilovers, we just pop out springs, pop new springs in, and just move them up. As their driving skills improve, we go to the next level, and then they learn to drive it even faster.